Okay, so we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. Just going over some homeworks. So we did number 37. Let's move on to number 38. And then I'm probably going to jump down to some of the harder ones. So we have the limit as x approaches 3 of 3x minus 7 equals 2. So I need to do 3x minus 7, absolute value, minus 2. It's less than epsilon. And now I'm over here looking at x minus 3 is less than delta. 3x minus 7 minus 2. That's going to give me 3x minus 9 is less than epsilon. Then how can I get this to look like this? Well, I can factor a 3 out of both of these, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to factor a 3 out. That gives me x minus 3 is less than epsilon. I still have the 3 out in front, so I divide by 3, divide by 3. Absolute value of x minus 3 is less than epsilon over 3. This is now the same as this, so I might know my delta is equal to epsilon over 3. All right, on to the next one. Number 39. Here I'm going through the same process again. I have absolute value of x minus 9. And then if I'm looking at my is less than delta. And then if I'm looking at my other one, it's absolute value of the square root of x minus 5 minus 2 is less than epsilon. All right, well, this one looks ugly in comparison to our last ones for sure. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add my 2 over. And when I do that, that means that I have to get rid of my absolute values first. As I think about this, another option I have here is to multiply by the conjugate. I'm not thinking that's going to do much for me. No. So I'd start by adding the 2. So that means I have to get rid of my absolute values first, which means I'm going to now have a negative epsilon is less than square root of x minus 5 minus 2, less than epsilon. Add that 2 over now. I have 2 minus epsilon is less than the square root of x minus 5, which is less than 2 plus epsilon. Now I square everything. That's going to give me x minus 5. This is then 2 minus epsilon squared. And then 2 plus epsilon squared. Add the 5 over. That's 2 minus epsilon squared plus 5 is less than x is less than 2 plus epsilon squared plus 5. Now I'm down to x here, so I have to get this down to x as well. Get rid of my absolute values. It gives me negative delta is less than x minus 9 is less than delta. Add the 9 to both sides. It's be 9 minus delta. It's less than x is less than 9 plus delta. And so this is my x here. So I'm just going to plug that in. And so when I start plugging this in, I don't want to mess around with it too much, but I want to get this to where it's in its proper form, squaring it. So that's going to give me 4 minus 4 epsilon plus epsilon squared plus 5. Now you'll see here I have 4 plus 5. It gives me 9 minus 4 epsilon plus epsilon squared. And so now if I plug this in for my delta, I don't know where my cursor went. When I plug this in for delta, I'm doing 9 minus 9. And I'm going to distribute that negative right now. I'm not even going to waste a step. We're in calculus. You know we can distribute that. Plus 4 epsilon minus epsilon squared. Those are going to cancel. I have 4 epsilon minus epsilon squared. That's a possibility for delta. If I plug this same thing in here, except now I have to do this version of it. So that would be 4, 2 squared is 4, and then it's going to be plus 4 epsilon plus epsilon squared plus 5. So this would really be a 9 here. 4 plus 5 is 9. If I plug that in for delta now, we're going to be looking at 18 plus 4 epsilon plus epsilon squared. This is going to be bigger than this, because I have this 18 added on, plus I'm adding each one of these elements. So this is my delta, because it's the smaller of the two. All right, this one's very similar to that, number 40. Let's move down to number 41. When I look at number 41, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start when x is not equal to 1, and that's x squared. So it says x approaches 1, so this is going to be x minus 1 is less than delta. Then I start with my equation. X squared minus the limit, which is 1, has to be less than epsilon. Never put a less than sign in. Have to do that. And now I get rid of my absolute values, and I start solving. So I have negative epsilon is less than x squared minus 1, which is less than epsilon. Add the 1 over. That's 1 minus epsilon is less than x squared is less than 1 plus epsilon. Take the square root to get rid of that. It gives me the square root of 1 minus epsilon is less than x is less than 1 plus epsilon. Square root Now I have what my x values are, and I'm going to plug them in up here. First, I have to solve this out. Negative delta is less than x minus 1 is less than delta. Add 1 to both sides. Negative delta plus 1 is less than x is less than delta plus 1. Now, if we're talking about which one's going to be greater and less than, this one's going to be less than because I'm subtracting this from 1. So now I'm going to plug these numbers in. I guess that doesn't necessarily work out. We don't know that yet. So let's start plugging the numbers in. I'm going to plug this in here. So this would be negative square root of 1 plus epsilon plus 1 is less than x. I should have plugged in this one here because it's the lower of the two, so that's my bad. We're going to do 1 minus the low side. I don't know why I did the high side. 1 minus epsilon. And then this is now going to be 1 plus the square root of 1 plus epsilon. Now, right now, we don't know which one is smaller, so I would just leave it in this form. I'm not going to make you pick which one it is. We know it's one of those two. And I would go for like the same thing for like 40 and 39. Once you get to this point, it's hard to see which one is smaller. And it really depends on which situation we're looking at, what number we're putting in. So if you just leave it in this form, I'm not going to make you pick one or the other. All right, let's do 42. Same process. You're going to find it's always going to be kind of the same process. I'm looking at x minus a negative 2, which makes that plus 2. It's less than delta. Then we plug our f of x in, and I'm plugging that x squared in. X squared minus my limit, which is 4, has to be less than epsilon. Get rid of my absolute values. Negative epsilon is less than x squared minus 4. Is less than epsilon. Add the 4. 4 minus epsilon is less than x squared. Is less than 4 plus epsilon. Take the square root of both sides. That gives me just x in the center, and it's the square root of 4 plus epsilon and 4 minus epsilon. Solve this one out. Negative delta is less than x plus 2. It's less than delta. Subtract the 2 over. Negative 2 minus delta is less than x is less than delta minus 2. Plug each of these in their corresponding spots. Negative 2 minus the square root of 4 minus epsilon is less than x is less than I don't like the way I wrote this, just because I'm always going to put that negative 2 first. Negative 2 plus delta, so that'd be negative 2 plus the square root of 4 plus epsilon. And now I'm done. So just remember to keep plugging your lower value from here into the lower side of this, and then the higher side into the higher side here. I want to move on to some of the homework problems from last night and just give you kind of a preview of your quiz. So whenever we look at your quiz, we're going to have you evaluate each limit. Some cases you're going to be able to plug the limit in, just the number. Other times you're not going to be able to plug it in. For a lot of these, you will be able to plug it in. Hint, this is not your quiz, it's just the same format for most of them. Another issue down here, if I'm looking at this, this would be like 1 squared plus 3 times 1 minus 3. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 minus 3 is 0. That's not going to work. I have to solve it. So some of these we're going to have to factor them out in order to solve them. You're going to have a couple limit questions as far as the definition of a limit and doing it using definitions. Not a whole lot. You're going to have a majority of them are going to be the simpler limit questions. You're welcome for that. But that's about it. All right. Good luck tomorrow. Fuck.